Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Braden.
I'm Tommy, and this is episode number 50.
Woo!
I
Pretty
can't believe
exciting.
it's already been 50 episodes.
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess it's been a little bit of a surprise because haven't been recording as much lately. I mean, we're back on the train, but um, so it kind of snuck up on us a little bit. But
Well, I didn't even realize until like I said to you in the text message that I was sending you when we were writing out, okay, episode 48 will be this, episode 49, and then it's like, oh, like 50. Like
yeah,
we're already at 50.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure. It seems like it's flown by. Like it doesn't feel like over a year ago we started recording. It feels like it's been like maybe 4 months,
Yeah, it
something like
still
that.
feels like it's something that's like new, and maybe it's because it still feels exciting. Like
Well, yeah,
every
it's
time we
exciting.
go to record and every time we get on Zoom and, plan what we're going to do. And, I still think there's a genuine level of excitement every time
Yeah,
we hop on to record an episode,
yeah,
which is why
definitely.
it doesn't feel like this, it's been around forever type thing.
I think if anything, it's probably gotten more exciting. Like just that we've gotten better at it, and we're starting to dive deeper and deeper, and like having a bit of a system, I guess, kind of exciting too for me. Anyway, I don't know.
It,
It's been a good time.
well, it is helpful, this sort of like 3-part series, an episode on whatever, and then a guest, and a 3-part series. And it gives us nice variety. We've
hmm
talked about, I don't know if we've talked about this on air, but off air,
hmm
it's fun to dive deep into something,
Yeah,
but you read a bunch of papers, you find a bunch of stuff, and you go, okay, like let's just for the next episode record something a little bit easier on us, and that's a chance just to kind of openly and freely talk about whatever training
Mhm.
topic, and then we bring on a guest and we get to learn from them and we let them do the heavy lifting for the episode.
Yeah,
And then okay, we're recharged, we're back, let's go deep dive into something and pull a whole bunch of research and read a bunch of stuff and go wild again and just keep going through that.
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's nice, definitely having like something relatively consistent to keep you on track to like like really learn about this kind of a topic and learn enough that you can be prepared for a conversation. But I feel like, I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I feel like we both learn a lot from just talking about it as well. And like you understand the topic a lot more. It's not just like I remember all these facts I learned from the research papers. It feels like it makes a lot more sense after going through that.
It's more rewarding than just like reading the paper and then going, okay, I got some, like you said, a few pieces of information out of that. You do feel like you get more out of it when you have a conversation with somebody and learn about it that way. I mean, with that being said, what's been your favorite like series or episode so far? If we go back like
Hmm.
over the course, I guess this is episode 50, so we only have 49 to pick from. 50, I guess, if you include episode 0, but
Hmm.
I don't include that. I don't count that. Um,
No.
like what's been like the biggest standout for you?
Um, so I guess I have to say two. One is it's super quick. Is just the weightlifting one purely for the fact that it like set the stage and we did a three-parter on it. We didn't know if we were going to do a three-parter or not, but it was a
Oh
lot
yeah,
of
that's
fun to
true.
do.
That was
Yeah.
one episode at a time. We'll see how much content we have.
Yeah, and it was just a lot of fun going through it that way. Um and that one was a little bit different because the third episode wasn't like the ideas, it was more case studies, but just because I have really enjoyed the three parters and like this little rhythm that we found ourselves in, and I because that one ended up being three parts, I feel like it's partly responsible. um
I would agree with that. That sort of set the stage for, okay, maybe this 3-parter thing
yeah.
works. We're enjoying it, so we'll keep doing it until we don't enjoy it anymore.
hmm but I think for me, my favorite series was the fashion one, just because I feel like I it connected a lot of dots for me. Just like learning that information, I feel like connected a lot of dots for me and was pretty influential in how I see training a human. Um, and also, just I guess that was the first time I reached out to somebody else to help like make sense of some of this stuff too. So, growing, I guess, as a human or as a coach in this sort of space where, you start to like reach out to people just to learn.
Well, you're not only reaching out to the research, but now you're also reaching out to other people. So
Yeah.
you're deep diving into that topic for the 3-parter, like in a new and more exciting way than you were before.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So how about you? Same question.
It would be the hypertrophy series.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I think the reason for that is because I don't, maybe I was on the verge or maybe had already gotten to the point where like I was going into the coaching toolbox and whatever tool represented hypertrophy, I was like removing it or had already like taken it out of the toolbox where it was like, we train, we lift, it's a byproduct of what happens, but we're not going to intentionally try to make any changes in that area. And we had like read some of the stuff, shared some of the papers and the experiences and other things like that. And that series got me to reframe how I looked at hypertrophy. And that tool is now back in my toolbox. And so I think that was a valuable thing to, you learn about it, you go, yeah, it's in my toolbox. And then you start to use it and you go, I don't know how valuable that is. Maybe I don't need room for that. I'm not using that tool ever. And then you discover maybe a new use or a new way that you might be able to implement it in training. And you go, okay, I'm going to put this back in the toolbox. So I think for me, that was probably an important outcome of that. So that would probably be why it was my kind of favorite one, was to be able to see a form of training or a tool in the toolbox in a brand new light. That
Yeah, for sure.
encouraged me to use it more than I was using it in the past.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point. And I think that highlights like how good of a job like you and we did with the research and like talking about it and stuff to be able to see different ways to apply it and different uses for it and things like that. And for myself, like each of the series aside from the weightlifting one, because I don't really coach anybody who weightlifts. So they've all helped me. Like my coaching has changed after looking at all that stuff and after having the conversation. Like I do things a little bit differently, at least not like I'm not.
Yeah, it's added value to what you
down,
do
but
for others.
yeah, exactly. So that's been really, really rewarding for sure. And we also wanted to talk about our favorite intros in this intro.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, we might have the same one. It was definitely Zach with
Yeah.
like, oh, like the sitting or standing on the toilet. Like, are you kidding me? I genuinely didn't even think he was serious about that.
Yeah.
So 100%, I have to thank you, Zach, for having the most outlandish, ridiculous intro I think we might ever have on the show.
Probably.
Like that by far is the most standout. I was like, I did not expect that. And I didn't even participate for the first like minute and a half in that conversation because I was just crying. Like I had tears in my eyes because I was laughing so hard at like just the ludicrous nature of this question.
Yeah.
And then every time he explained it and was like, oh, well, because of this and because I'm like, oh, he's digging himself into a deeper hole. This is just getting even better.
Yeah.
So for sure, that was my favorite intro. I can't remember if that was the first or second episode with Zach, but it was one of them. But that was my favorite. That was my favorite intro to date, and probably will be. I don't think anyone will top that. I really don't.
That was the first time we recorded with Zach, but it was the second episode that we released.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, that for sure was my favorite as well.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it was.
Okay,
it was
perfect.
It was. It took me a second to think about it. The first one that came to mind was the Lego one, the like childhood toys one.
I did enjoy that one.
I thought that one was a lot of fun. Much more recent, obviously. And I also wanted to give honorable mention to the hot dog one, the first one. Like I could be misremembering, but I think that came out of nowhere. Like I don't think we planned anything, and you just said it.
I think that's how we ended up with like the random intro thing.
Yeah, which is a very like enjoyable part of the episode for me. And I also got like a lot of messages and comments on the post and stuff about the hot dog one. So
yeah, it divides a room.
It does. Yeah.
Not as much as sitting or standing, according to Zach, because he said that apparently divides a room. And I was like, well, maybe it
50%.
depends what room you're in, but
Yeah. Well, he said like 48% or something like that. I was like, there's
I was
no
like,
way.
where is he pulling these numbers
There's
from?
no way. That's way too high. So yeah,
Oh,
good stuff though.
but yeah, for sure. That was my favorite.
Yeah.
And like I said, I challenge any of our guests who come on from here on out to like top that. I don't think they will.
Well, yeah, probably not. I mean, they'd be hard pressed.
Big
If someone
ask.
sees that as a challenge, then I mean, I guess some guests probably listen to as some of the so I know some of them do for sure. So if you think you've got something better, then like come back and
Yeah,
we'll see.
we'll happily take you on for a part 2 if you think
Yeah.
you can outdo Zach.
But yeah, and then I mean today we're starting a new series.
We are.
Which is, I mean, I guess it's become pretty much a regular thing, so not necessarily special for 50, but who cares? We're here for the content anyway.
That's right.
And
Nobody wants a review episode. We said that.
Yeah.
So,
if you want a review of something, then just message us and we'll let you know what we talked about.
yeah, or go back and watch it. It's up to you.
Yeah, it's all there. All the information's there. And so yeah, today we wanted to talk about, well, we've talked about it a little bit, aerobic, like endurance, oxidative capacity, energy systems.
Yeah, like everything energy systems wise that is not at all in our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Like the exact opposite of everything we would do,
generally speaking,
which is why this is probably a good series for us to do.
Yeah. We definitely, at least up until now, we haven't really been doing much of this stuff, which is fair because you're a sprint guy and I'm a powerlifting guy. So you don't really need that much oxidative capacity for those sports anyway. But I don't know. We both like working with athletes. So that's an important part of their training as well.
Yeah. Depending on the, like it's, I mean, if I go back to talking about why was the hypertrophy one so beneficial or so much fun was I felt more confident with a tool in the toolbox. And hopefully at the end of this series, we both feel more confident with a tool in the toolbox we don't often go to use.
Mm-hmm.
If like ever.
Yeah. No, 100%.
I genuinely don't know how much I've actually programmed like legitimate aerobic work for somebody to do.
Yeah, rarely.
Like very rarely.
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess with all that said, I guess we're probably going to exclude the sprinters and the powerlifters a little bit, but why is this stuff important? Or did we want to talk about what it is first?
I think we should talk about why it's important because no one's going to care what it is if they don't think it's important.
All right.
So let's do our best to sell the audience on the importance of something we both never use.
Yeah. Sounds
that's
good.
That's the challenge we're up for today.
Yeah. Sounds good. I guess for me, the first most obvious thing, having a higher aerobic capacity means more of what you do is under that threshold, meaning like not necessarily fatiguing. So if you are capable of running at a speed that is above someone else's oxidative capacity, you win because you're faster and you don't get tired versus they're slower and they get tired. It's probably never going to be that drastic, but that's the same kind of idea. There's a lot of research that I read that shows like athletes with higher VO2 max run further in a game, are able to do more high intensity efforts, more involved with the ball and more passes, more shots, things like that. So there's some value to sport performance that way anyway, just being more involved, more around.
Yeah, I was going to take a step even further back and just say, like, even the most anaerobic athlete primarily uses the aerobic system like throughout the day.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's always on. It's always providing you with energy, whether that's, in your sport for whatever demands you're facing, but also in daily life. And, you climb a set of stairs, you walk out to your car, you push the grocery cart around in the store, go on a hike, you do whatever. Like it's always there, and it's the system that can provide you with the largest volume of energy.
Mhm.
Doesn't provide you with the fastest rate of energy, but it gives you the most total amount of energy, and you're using it throughout the day. And so I think the better place you can be in with that system, if you think about the athlete is like a global being beyond just the 2 hours a day maybe they train for their sport. But if you think about, the other 22 hours of the day, or the 24-hour human or person that is behind the athlete, it's being used all the time. And so it doesn't necessarily mean you need to have, the most powerful aerobic system in the world, but you need to have some capability within that system. And, nobody plays sport forever at like a higher competitive level. So at some point, you have to be prepared for life. And I think the aerobic system is probably one of the more important bits to, prepare you for training for life, if that's what you want to call it. So definitely athletic implications for sure. But then I think huge implications outside of sport for general health and well-being and things like that. So I think that's probably the reason you can't just fully ignore it
Yeah.
as much
Yeah.
as I would like to.
100%. 100% training for life. And even just, yeah, like general like stress on the body, which is going to have an impact on how you recover from training and from games. Anyway, like I think it's easy. I definitely, as a young athlete, took some pride when I was in like my peak powerlifting, that I got winded at the top of the stairs because like, oh, I'm so anaerobic. I'm
Yeah,
so
like I'm
like,
so strong, I'm so
yeah,
fast, I'm so powerful that
yeah,
like I'm so inefficient.
yeah.
Look at me go.
Yeah, exactly. So I think just for the young athletes that are potentially listening, it's like, yeah, I get that, but there is also benefits from like being a little bit more aerobically inclined will help you recover from training, which means you can do more training, which means you can do more stressful, more intense training. Um,
And
it'll
not be
help you,
winded walking up the stairs.
which is really nice. It's
Yeah.
not fun to be winded walking up the
No,
stairs.
it's not. It
Um,
really isn't.
and it'll help you recover like between I mean, you have more capacity to do higher rep sets as well, which I mean maybe isn't your thing, but um you don't need to take as long of a rest in between sets. You can probably do more sets, more work in a workout. And in your sport, like most sports are bursts of high intensity with, and some amount of low intensity effort. And if that low intensity effort is actually relatively high intensity for you, then you're probably not recovering that well in between your high intensity bursts. So it's important from that perspective. There's value to your sport, for being like, you don't have to be like a VO2 max of 80, which is elite, but a little bit more is a little bit more helpful.
Yeah, you don't want to be running around with a VO2 max like 20 or 25.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, and that's probably when you were winded going up the stairs.
Yeah, I was. I remember in Kin 101, I think. We didn't do a VO2 max test, but we did like a progressive exercise where then you extrapolate and figure out what your VO2 max should be. Um, and I think I got something like 26 or 27, which like it didn't have a reference, but I thought I remembered something from class being like, oh yeah, that's actually pretty good. I didn't think like I did, I thought I was better than I, thought I would be. And then I compared it to the chart and was like, oh yeah, you're below average for someone who's like 65.
Yeah, you're like, oh man, I maybe need to address this.
Yeah. But last year I started running a little bit and VO2 is up because I participated in a research study more recently. So
Oh, that yeah, we were talking about that. So
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so that's the tale of why this is important. Even if
Um,
you are the most anaerobically driven athlete out
mhm,
there, there's still value in having some level of development in the aerobic system.
mhm. Um, this is a little bit of a smaller note, but some interesting things that I found as well. Some papers to support that more aerobically inclined athletes get injured less, get sick less.
Well,
And
that's interesting.
yeah,
The injury one is particularly interesting.
yeah, there was one study that was comparing like training levels and fitness levels of Aussie rules football players. And they had, I can't remember what the unit was, but it was essentially like training time multiplied by RPE was the,
Oh, is that like the Trimp score or whatever? Is that what it's called?
it was called something really weird.
Oh, okay.
I had never heard of it before and I had to look it up and it took me like 15 minutes to figure out what they were actually talking about. But yeah, they're like training very little. I think they used a 1 mile run as their score to determine fitness and like improvement and stuff. Was like the highest injury rates was if you didn't train very much and had like poor running times. Moderate amounts of training, which their score was 2,000 minutes times RPE
Yeah.
in a week, was correlated with the highest rates of progress and lowest injury rates. And then over 4,000, there was no benefit to aerobic performance and potentially higher injury rates from training at that point.
Okay.
And then there was another study. I don't remember exactly what they did, but it was like, yeah, like youth female soccer players. And yeah, the less fit got sick more, injured more. And then the other thing that I found interesting, more like higher VO2, higher aerobic capacity, is associated with like better cognitive health as well and awareness and things like that, which I thought was interesting because in soccer players, higher VO2 was correlated with like better passing, passing efficiency and things like that. And I was like, well, that why is that? Like, why would that be? Probably because if you're not tired, then you're more alert.
Yeah. And if you're more alert, you're making better decisions, you're making better passes, you're putting the ball in better places.
Yeah, and also with a better aerobic capacity, like the brain is more vascularized and things like that too. So you're actually getting more oxygen and stuff to the brain as well, which is important. So yeah, some other things that were interesting, I thought, anyway.
If that doesn't sell you on the importance of it, I don't know what will.
Yeah.
That collective, all that stuff, if that doesn't, like, that highlights why it matters.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be the main focal point of your training. It doesn't have to be the only thing you do. It probably shouldn't be the only thing you do. But
unless you're a disty.
Even then, I don't even know if that.
No, you got to do some speed stuff too. That's right.
You got to do a little bit. Yeah, exactly. You got to do a little bit of stuff to be prepared to, kick at the end or make a move or do something like that. So I think it just highlights the value of having some level of it in there. Like I said, not everybody needs to be training to run a marathon, but you should maybe have at least maybe 1 day a week out there.
Yeah.
Where you do something that's a little bit more continuous, a little more aerobic in nature, because the benefits that you just talked about are, I'd say, quite substantial.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. At the very least, like you can't be walking around with a VO2 max 25. It's not a good time.
No. And you are firsthand experience of telling everybody not to do that.
Yeah, that's right. So hopefully you're sold. And if you're not sold, then I guess stop listening.
You can go change to a different episode.
But yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it makes sense to dive into a little bit of how it works so that we can set the stage for like how to train it and things like that. So we've talked a good amount about energy, which energy in the body is just ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which you derive energy from breaking off the third phosphate group, essentially.
Yeah, you break that molecule up, and by breaking it up, you release energy.
Yeah. And then you use that energy to do everything. Everything your body needs to do is ATP.
Yeah, whether it's like the heart pumping or your muscles contracting or anything like that.
Yeah. And we have 3 different systems that produce ATP. One is phosphocreatine. So that's creatine with a phosphate group on it.
And that splits
interacts,
up.
and that splits up. Well, I think that splits up, and then the phosphate goes onto ADP to form
Yeah.
ATP, and then that splits up for energy.
Yeah.
And
then there is ATP storage as well in the muscles, a very small amount.
Yeah.
That can be used like immediately right away.
Yeah.
And then it's the phosphocreatine system that would then resupply work to resupply that immediate store in the muscle.
Yeah. And then you've got anaerobic glycolysis, which essentially is breaking up a glucose or glycogen molecule. And it just stops at pyruvate. I don't know all the reactions, but
I at one point knew all like whatever it is, like 16 steps in the Krebs cycle.
Did you really?
Yeah, we had to remember it for grade 12 bio in high school, and I couldn't probably even tell you like 3 of the 16 steps right now, or however many steps there actually are.
Yeah, I've never known that.
Yeah,
whatever. I think anaerobic glycolysis makes like 4 ATP per glucose or something like that. It's like 2 or 4 or something like that. I think maybe it makes 4 and requires 2. So
yeah, so it's like a net gain of 2. I remember that being the case. Yeah, not something that it really matters.
Not that, yeah, no, it doesn't matter. I think glycogen is maybe 1 less.
Yeah, one of them is more, one of them is less. I can't remember which one.
Regardless, it's not a lot, but it's fast. Neither of these are a lot, but they're fast, which is why we use them while we're ramping up for the oxidative glycolysis, which takes so much more time, but is like 39 or 40 per glucose. And that's where you're
39, I feel like, is the number I remember. That rings a bell.
Well, yeah, it depends again if it's glucose or glycogen. It's maybe 39 or 38.
Something like that. Yeah.
Glucose or glycogen.
But substantially more in terms of the total energy that's created via that system.
And that's when we're taking glucose down to pyruvate into the mitochondria, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain. And then we've got a bunch of ATP, and that works for fats as well.
Yes.
And fats is like 100 and something.
Oh, yeah, it's like substantially more.
So,
because fat has more energy than sugars and other things like that.
Yeah.
Hence why you end up with like 8 times the amount of ATP when you go through.
Yeah. Exactly. So, and the, I guess, tricky thing with the phosphocreatine system is it runs out really fast. There's not a lot of phosphocreatine in the body. The key with anaerobic glycolysis is that you produce a lot of metabolites. Mm-hmm. And then the tricky thing with oxidative glycolysis is you need oxygen, which sometimes you don't have enough of. And it's slow is the other part. And it's slow.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're basically skewed on one end with the anaerobic systems. It works so quickly. It can provide you the energy to sprint super fast, jump super high. But the capacity or the gas tank is not very big. Mm-hmm. And you run out of the ability to do that very quickly. Mm-hmm. And then on the extreme other end, you almost never will run out of energy that can be made available via the oxygen system.
Well, you don't until you're dead.
Yeah, basically, yeah, because you always have some sort of fat stores, and you always have it produces an unfathomable amount of energy that you'd probably stop running and walking and doing whatever movement you were doing before you ran out of that. But it doesn't allow you to do overly explosive, acrobatic, wild maneuvers. It's for, like we said, you can go walk or run at a slower pace or something like that. It doesn't allow you to, do some of the highlight actions you might see in sport, mm-hmm. which are like fast and explosive things. And yeah, like you said, then the sort of anaerobic lactic system sits somewhere in the middle, and you can do things relatively fast, but only for so long. And then everything starts to burn. And, I'm sure everyone's probably been there before in some way where you're winded, you're having a hard time breathing, your muscles start to burn, they seize up, like you've pushed your system to the limit.
Yeah.
I mean, that was always at the end of a 400.
I was going to
300. That's kind of how you feel.
Yeah. 400 or Wingate test is probably the best 2 examples if you've done either of those. Mm-hmm. If you've done either of those, but if you haven't, then like if you played hockey, like every shift, you're probably hitting that at the end of the shift. If you've ridden a bike going up a hill or running,
Oof.
just going for a jog up a hill, honestly, you're hitting that. So yeah, it's a very familiar. I mean, honestly, muscle burn in any capacity, generally speaking, is going to be your pushing your anaerobic glycolysis.
Yeah, and most people have probably experienced that in one way or the other.
Yeah.
And so they know, like, yeah, I can run fast, but it was longer than like 2 seconds. But there's no way I could keep that pace up for 5 minutes because everything just starts to burn, and it's like, okay, I'm done. I got to tap out.
Yeah. Yeah. That is interesting how like you like not running. You don't have to run at 100%, but if you're running for more than 10 seconds for sure, probably more than 5 seconds, then you are going to start to like breathe heavy.
Yeah.
But you can run at speed for like 3 seconds and not feel anything until you're done.
Yeah. And you wake up the next day and you're annihilated. It's
Yeah,
basically what
you are.
happens.
If you are, yeah.
Yeah. And your nervous system, you're like, why am I so tired? Even though I got 9 hours of sleep.
Yeah. But the important thing to remember is none of these things work in isolation. So yes, I mean, great example off the top. You are always using your oxidative system to keep you alive, to do all the things like like the energy to pump your heart, the energy to, like, if you're just watching TV and you're shifting positions, the energy to digest, the energy for your brain to think, things like that is all oxidative. And then if you want to be doing something that's more explosive and you need more energy faster, then the phosphagen system is going to kick on more intensely. Like, I don't know how much it actually is doing at baseline. Not a lot, but I have to imagine it's doing something. But it's going to be the primary producer of ATP if you're sprinting. Like while you're in the blocks, it's oxidative, and as soon as you're pushing off the blocks, phospho.
It primarily becomes that other.
Yeah. And then the anaerobic glycolysis is going to be contributing a significant amount as well as you're coming out of the blocks. But then the longer the race goes on, then it's going to become more and more anaerobic glycolysis. And, if it's a distance run, then within a minute or two, it's going to be primarily oxidative again.
Yeah. And I think that's probably one of like I said, the first place I went back was that paper by Gaston from 2001, where it's like a review of a number of different studies. It's whether it's a systematic review or a meta-analysis, I can't remember the difference between what's what, but it looked at a whole bunch of papers and reviewed the information that was available. And it's great to dispel the myth, like you talked about, of the energy systems working in isolation. And I don't know if you did you take an exercise phys class in high school?
I don't know, actually. I think it was just bio. I don't think we had exercise phys.
Okay, because I remember explicitly in that class, it gives you like a time frame. Like if you work from 0 to 10 seconds, it's your ATP phosphocreatine system. If you work from 10 seconds up to like 45 seconds, then it's the anaerobic lactic. And then if you go from 45 to 2 minutes, it's slow glycolysis. And then anything 2 minutes over is the oxidative system. So it very much gives you this impression that the energy systems operate in isolation based on what you're doing. Like it's like a light switch. The system's on or it's off.
Those are also the timeframes listed in the NSCA textbook. So
that's right. That's right. And so it does give, I think, a false impression of, hey, if you are a weightlifter, for example, and it takes you 3 seconds to perform that clean and jerk, you don't need any other ability beyond that. It's not important. Even like a 100-meter sprinter who can go sub 10 seconds. Well, you don't need anything else. You just need phosphocreatine system because you're under 10 seconds. And so I think this paper does a really good job to kind of highlight, and they do, like, there's visuals, there's charts, there's all kinds of stuff. So whether you want to see it in numbers or whether you want to see it with charts overlapping, you see that, like you said, there's always some level of contribution from the different energy systems. Because even like you said, something that's short term, 10, 15 seconds, the aerobic system is going to try to do what it can to provide some recovery and put more ATP in the system. It's not going to be a lot in the sense that it doesn't contribute very quickly. So it's not going to determine performance, but it's still going to contribute some level of energy that was used in that time frame. And so there's that one chart from Gaston where I think it's in 10-second increments, and it does a percentage breakdown of the ATP burned via aerobic and anaerobic. And in the 0 to 10 second, it was like 94 and 6. So yes, heavily dependent on anaerobic, but 6% of the energy still came from the aerobic system. So it's, again, they're always working together. It's just to what degree. And then obviously you go to the extreme and you do something like 500 seconds, and it's probably going to be flipped. Maybe 5% of your energy came from an anaerobic store and 95 came from an aerobic, but there's still 5% of that energy you had to depend on from that other system. And so then, I think about it from a training perspective, that gives you an idea of how important is that system for what you end up needing to do. And the closer you get to a 50-50 kind of scenario, the more important both of them really become. But it does highlight that those systems are always active, working together. So you can't truly just ignore that system altogether on either end. As an extreme anaerobic athlete, you can't ignore the aerobic. As an extreme aerobic athlete on the other end, you still need some anaerobic ability to help you exceed in your sport. So that's why I really like that paper. And the point that they bring up is the backing or the proof behind why this is the case is because if you start to do studies and isolate the energy systems, basically impossible to do. Because when researchers have gone to try to, well, how much energy is coming from this? It's like, well, there's this amount of energy that's not counted for. And so, yeah, because you were trying to separate and create isolation between something that's entirely overlapped. And so, like I said, that's one of my, I do like that paper. I think it's a great review. And if you go on Google Scholar, it's been cited like thousands of times or whatever. So in terms of, if you hit that button of like what cited this paper, you now have a whole bunch of studies that you can look at like in the future that have taken that concept and explored it further. So that's why I like it so much. It's sort of a go-to like launch point to, you want to dive into this stuff. This is a good place to look.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a great point to bring it up and explain it that way, because it helped me. Like, of course, I know that everything's always working all the time, but just from a practical standpoint, it's not like as soon as you start sprinting, the oxidative system is suddenly incapable of producing energy. Like, it's not capable of being the primary because it takes time. It takes too much time. So it's not going to, be fast enough to be the primary supplier. But it's still working. Like, your heart's still beating. You're still digesting a little bit. Like, you're still breathing. Like, all these other muscles are still working. So it's not like even the type 2 fibers still have mitochondria. It's not like, hey guys, we have ATP. Do you want it? Pass.
No,
Phosphagen system's got it covered. Thanks.
Yeah. We don't need you.
Yeah, that's not gonna. You need ATP. You got ATP. It's going to come from any system, and likewise, if you're in an endurance event, maybe not as much on track, running around a flat circle, but still, you want to pass somebody. You need a little extra boost, or if it's like a street marathon or something like that, you're going up and down hills. If it's a trail marathon, you're going up and down hills for sure. So you need a little extra boost here and there. And if you want to kick the last kilometer or whatever, I personally can't imagine kicking maybe the last 100 meters I could kick, but
dude, if I ran a marathon, I don't know if I could kick anywhere.
No, I can't run a marathon. I don't have that kind of capacity. Maybe I will at one point. I don't think so, but
I definitely won't. Dude, if I go for a 20-minute jog, I'm annihilated.
Yeah.
So
same. I think I hit my peak, my all-time PR for like longest distance run is like 4.5K. which I don't know. I'm limited by shin splints a lot of the time,
Yeah, your shins hold you back.
which is a different thing. But it's tough though. Those hills get me for sure.
Well, and that's where I think one of the important things to bring up is that, yeah, they're active all the time, but it doesn't differentiate performance, right? But it gives the idea that you need a baseline level of that ability to at least compete at that level. I mean, I can speak, for example, like the 100 or the 200. Yeah, the energy supply you're getting from the aerobic system is so small. It's not going to determine who wins and loses the race. But there is definitely a baseline level of aerobic fitness that everybody in that race has.
Mhm.
So you don't need to have the highest VO2 max of all the sprinters, but you need to be, like I said, there's some baseline you need to hit. And it's probably the same on the other end. You don't need to be the fastest, like top speed runner as a marathoner, be able to hit the highest speed on a bike in a like road racing, but you need to have enough of that anaerobic ability that in the event that you need to use it, it's there and it's prepared. So I think that it highlights the importance of needing to work on that system, but you don't need to overwork that system. It's more, can you get it to a baseline and get it to a good spot so the athlete can get that 6% of the energy from that energy system you need in their sport, and then you've done a good job.
Yeah. Well, even if you're talking about the 100 meter, like one of the most anaerobic things that you can compete in, like you, as soon as you finish your 100 meter, like you're huffing and puffing, like your oxidative system is trying to take over to recover all of the energy substrate that you just used, in an efficient way that doesn't, put more and more stress on the body. And especially like you, track and field enthusiast, athlete, like you're running the like the quarters and the semis and then the finals. In the 100 you're running the semis and the finals. In the 200 you're running the 400, like over the course of a weekend, or like potentially you're doing multiple races in one day for sure, I would
Yeah,
say.
there are definitely times where you're doing multiple races in a day, and
So you need some capacity to recover before your next race. Like I don't know how long the gap would be in between, but
it depends.
like
Like
it's
there's been times where I had like 3 hours between races. There's been times you have like 10 minutes.
exactly. And if your oxidative system's like garbage, then good luck recovering in 10 minutes. I've been at, like when I was in high school, we did rugby tournaments and we'd play, like they were shortened games, but we played 4 or 5 games in one day. Like you need that. And then on the other end, watching the Olympics, the Summer Olympics, I didn't enjoy watching most of the 5K, but the last lap, the last couple laps, like that's where everyone's trying to kick it, and only if you can. Like everyone's a clump, and then it separates into a couple clumps, and then there's 1 or 2 guys or girls that are trying to race each other down to the finish line, and whoever has the better anaerobic capacity at that point is gonna, along with neural adaptations and things like that, is going to win. So in a very endurance based event, like it does come down to that at some point anyway.
Yeah, you might primarily be using the aerobic system to set yourself up to be, at the front of the pack with 4,900 meters through
Yeah.
a 5K race. But then in that last 100, like you said, the person beside you starts to really move. Do you have the speed? Do you have the anaerobic energy production and ability to keep up with that person?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think, like I said, I think I really enjoy that paper as far as just being a good launch point to like, it dispels a lot of myths about the aerobic system, and just kind of highlights, it does a good job of highlighting how it functions. And, like I said, those charts do a great job of showing that you can't ignore it entirely. Doesn't need to be a big focus one way or the other, but you need to spend some time developing that stuff.
Yeah. Maybe we'll post that then. Maybe that'll be our post for this episode, is that article.
Yeah,
And
that chart. I mean, I'll definitely share it on mine at some point.
yeah.
I'd planned to do that. But yeah, like I said, I think it's just a good place
Hmm.
to start to figure out, like, yeah, what is the energy, like, what are the energy systems? How do they work? How do they interact?
Hmm. Yeah.
How do they function? Because even if you only want to learn about one energy system, it's tough to learn about them in isolation because they function based on how the other ones are operating as well.
I mean, that's 100%. Like, one is primarily responsible, but if it can't do its job for whatever, like they all have limitations. So if one can't do the job for the task you're asking them, the other one's gonna, like, other ones are gonna step into support, because if you're doing something, you need energy for it.
Yeah, and there's always like a rate limiter or like a what do they call it? The limiting agent, is that what they call it in chemistry? When you have like
Oh,
two
maybe.
chemicals that you're putting together, compounds to make something else, and it's which one is limiting your ability to make more of that thing. But there's always, I don't remember the exact like enzymes and substrates and things like that, but there's like a signaling substrate or a signaling enzyme, right, where all of a sudden there starts to be a buildup of, I think, like for the like glycolysis, if there's a buildup of ADP, that's the signaling process for that energy system to start producing more energy, because it recognizes this abundance of ADP means the phosphocreatine system is starting to like become overworked because there's
Hmm.
all this leftover ADP that can't be resynthesized.
Hmm.
And then there's something else within the like the glycolytic system that signals for the aerobic system to start picking up some more of the slack, because you're ending up with all these byproducts or substrates.
Hmm.
As a result, it's like, oh, okay, there's a lot of hydrogen ions kicking around. Okay, we better get this show on the road, because that system's not going to be able to be the primary deliverer on the energy. So I think that's why, like, yes, we're going to focus probably more later on in the series on the aerobic system itself, because we're most unfamiliar with that. But it's tough to like learn and figure out the systems without learning about the other ones, because even if you wanted to dive into one system, you realize, oh yeah, it gets kickstarted by this other system that does that gets kickstarted by the other system.
Hmm.
Like they work together, so it's really hard to separate them.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. They each have signals that get them started. They each have like rate limiting reactions, and then like physiological things that will limit them as well. And I mean, we got a little bit of time, so I was thinking like we can dive into that stuff for the aerobic system anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
in terms of like, I mean, it's called aerobic. I don't actually know the root of that word, but I imagine I always remembered aerobic as air. So
Yeah, it's got to
like,
be.
yeah.
And like
Uh,
some people call it an aeroplane, and we call it an airplane.
mm, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. There,
it's got to mean air. It has to.
it has to. Regardless, it also is called oxidative glycolysis, which means oxygen. So
Yes.
um, you need oxygen for it, is the point.
Yeah,
And if you don't have oxygen, then
you can't use it.
you can't use it. So what is like limiting your ability to get in oxygen? One thing that might not be the first thing you consider, but it's the pressure in the air, like of oxygen in the air. And it gets into the blood because the pressure of oxygen in blood returning to the heart and returning to the lungs is lower than that in the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's the path of
Which,
least resistance.
yeah,
High
exactly.
pressure will move to low pressure. So, like you said, if you have a high pressure system with the oxygen and a low pressure system without it, it'll allow it to move right over.
Exactly. So that's why exercising at higher altitudes is harder, because the pressure difference is lower. So you get less oxygen into the blood. Um, but it's also a really tough thing, because that is something you can't train. Like, you can't teach your blood to take in more oxygen, or your lungs to like allow more oxygen to transfuse across the alveoli. Um, so that's one part of it, like getting the oxygen into the blood and then getting the blood to the muscles, which is going to be dependent on heart function and vascular function, essentially.
Yeah, and then even how well, like you said, does the um, do the blood cells move oxygen? Like how well does the tissue itself use the
Mm-hmm.
oxygen, right? So because you may end up with, if you're very inefficient and you don't have a lot of mitochondria and other structures within the muscle that use oxygen to produce ATP and make that energy, then you potentially have a lot of like oxygenated blood moving through that wasn't actually helping fuel the
Mm-hmm.
muscle because the muscle couldn't use that much. You had 100 oxygens available. This is not scientific at all, but you had 100 oxygens available and your muscle could only use 50. So you end up with 50 wasted oxygens
Yeah.
that you never used. But if your muscle had greater capacity to use 100 oxygens, now
Mm-hmm.
you can use all of it. And then the next time the blood comes around, you can be more efficient with it. So I think that's great that you brought that up because the aerobic system depends on so many. There's, like you said, the air pressure, how much oxygen is available, your breathing, and your rate of ventilation, and how much air can you pull in, and how much air can actually be transferred within the lungs from, you know, the gas in the air being moved into the liquid
Mm-hmm.
of your blood, and your hemoglobin, right? Like
Yeah. I
the
mean, red blood cell count, plasma volume are
yeah,
also things like
and
blood
you're limited
content.
too because each hemoglobin molecule can only hold so much oxygen.
Mhm.
I think, is it 4? Is that what it is?
I think so. I mean, that's what we learned. Maybe that's right. Maybe that's not. Maybe that's one of the things that they simplified to make it easier for our tiny brains to understand.
Yeah, that's not sure. But what we know is that hemoglobin, like an individual hemoglobin molecule, has a limit on how much oxygen it can move.
Yes.
So the more hemoglobin you have, the more oxygen you can move, the better, like you said, the pressure, it moves the oxygen from one place to the other. How the physical structure or the architectural structure of your muscle, does it have the
Mhm.
mitochondria? Does it have the structures it needs to use the oxygen? There's so many
Yeah.
elements.
Capillary, artery compliance, and ability to dilate and things like that.
And
Yeah.
even like, and you said like, we didn't even talk about like stroke volume and heart rate and
Yeah.
like all
Yep.
those things as well. So there's so many elements where if you wanted to improve or change the way your body uses the aerobic system, there are so many, like all these things we just listed are things that could improve or not improve, and it
Hmm.
would change your aerobic ability overall.
Yeah. And then there's other things like downstream too, as well, that kind of like help you when you're on the edge, like maybe lengthen or raise the edge, raise the ceiling a little bit, which we'll probably get into more next time. But and the other thing that's really interesting, when I was looking into it and talking with different people and stuff, um, not all of those things are trainable.
No.
Right? Like the amount of oxygen getting into the blood is 100% dependent upon the pressure in the air. So like you will never ever be able to get more oxygen into the blood than you currently can. So you need to get more blood to your muscles and use the oxygen in the blood better if you want to adapt.
Well, and I didn't even think too, like you talked about some of the altitude stuff. I didn't even look into that. Did you take Kin 402?
No.
The hyper and hypobaric? That's the one where Chris Hadfield came in and did a few guest lectures because he talks about
No,
what
I
if
didn't.
your blood pressure changes and things like that, like in space.
I remember you
Um,
talked about like the where you like flex the quad super hard so you keep the blood in your brain when
oh
you're
yeah, there
doing
was
like
the
a
fighter
barrel.
pilot maneuver. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that the blood couldn't
Yeah.
drain out of your head as you were like making a rapid move in a fighter jet. But like I didn't even like we didn't even I didn't even look. I'm gonna have to go look at some of that stuff for episode 2, as we talk about the adaptations. Because when you're talking about some things can't change, like there are people, when you talk about altitude, the people who get altitude sickness, they don't have the genetic or the physiological capability of adapting to that low oxygen environment, and that's how they end up
Mm.
with that oxygen sickness. And so it, it is fascinating when you talk about some of that stuff where, like, yeah, you and I both might go up on a big mountain and one of us gets mountain sick, like altitude sickness, and the other one doesn't, because one of us has the ability to then produce more hemoglobin and make the breathing changes and the heart rate changes and all those things to account for that over time, and one of us can't. So then, as we talk about in the second episode, some of the adaptations and the way that we train, altitude training is feasible for some people. It's not for others. It's only feasible if you can get to altitude and actually make adaptations.
Or you have the mask.
Or you have the mask. But even then, if it doesn't work, like if you don't adapt to the mask or the low oxygen environment, then you don't get the benefit of that, like training and living in a high altitude environment and then being a superhuman when you come back down to low altitude. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't even think about that content, because there's a lot of really interesting stuff on aerobic system changes, and particularly if we're going to be talking about aerobic performance in sport, because the whole altitude training thing, that's a big topic.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a lot of research into it. I didn't look into it really at all either. Like there was some reviews and stuff that mentioned it, which is why, I bring it up. And I talked to a respiratory phys guy, and his thing was like, like it doesn't matter. Like you're never, ever going to make your lungs adapt. So then I was just like, okay, fine. Just ignore that then. I'm not going to focus on the oxygen that gets into the blood at all. But yeah, from a training standpoint, we should definitely look into what kinds of, like, how does your body adapt to handle lower oxygen content?
Yeah, like I said, I have all that stuff all from class and things like that. I need to go back and review it, which I'll be able to do before the next one. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I was so focused on like, what, like we do cycling, we do running, we do this, and what's changing, that I didn't even think like, oh yeah, there's a number of people that would, well, I'm going to go do that same thing, but at a way higher altitude to make a certain change. And as the answer always seems to be in the world of training, it depends. But I think it'll be fun to touch on some of that stuff, and may even open up an avenue for the last part, where maybe somebody goes out and buys an oxygen mask as a result of, please don't, but maybe one of us is going to come up with a wild idea, and then we're going to be going out and purchasing one of those, Bane masks to, and, limit how much air we can breathe in. And it's going to make us way better at training. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, so based on what I've read so far, I don't think this is so, like, you need to train it for sure, but I don't think training it needs to be so specific that you need to spend money. Really, personally, so far. Anyway, we'll see what happens. But
I'm just gonna make a note here, because I do want to write down to look at this stuff before.
Yeah, I was gonna make a joke too that maybe the move is just to move to Denver, and that's how you do your training. You just live in Denver forever.
Man, that was a thing, and
yeah, I know. You go to Denver to train, or you go to, I don't know,
but even like Denver, Mile High, like you heard about it all the time. Like if you watch the NFL and the guys are sitting there on the sidelines, have the oxygen masks on, because they're not used to the high altitude. And Pat McAfee has a great breakdown he did on his show 3 or 4 weeks ago, when Tucker broke the NFL record for the farthest kick.
Oh yeah.
And then Pat was breaking down like the mechanics, but then he was also talking about like there's
the flight at different pressures of air and stuff like that.
Yeah. So in low pressure environments, you can kick the ball farther because there's less oxygen, there's less wind resistance. So it changes how you're going to approach kicking the ball and this and that. So
yeah, I've heard of long drive guys talking about the same thing too, with like the air pressures, but also like the temperature and stuff, and like how the elastic components of the ball and the club and I mean the football as well, that change at different temperatures.
So I mean that obviously has nothing to do with aerobic performance, but the idea that you're in an altered environment.
Yeah. And temperature does, though. I didn't look into that really that much either. Temperature does.
Yes.
And fascia system does also. So
hey, we're gonna be able to link that. Let's go.
Yeah. If you haven't listened to those, listen to those first. Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm way more excited now about part 2 and 3 than I really thought I would be. Like I despise I despise conditioning, period. I mean, I'll talk about it in the third part, but and I sent you the text messages as well. I I was like I knew this would be
Got me
good
on
for
it.
me,
Yeah, you
but I
really fucked
wasn't
me on
super pumped about doing this, but I'm a lot more excited than I initially was
it. Yeah, you
going
really.
into this part 2 and 3. Now that we're talking about all this
Yeah, there was a bit of
wild stuff.
resistance, but I'm happy we're here. I knew it was going to be a good one.
Yeah.
And it's important to talk about it.
Yeah, so I'm more fired up for it than I thought I would be. So
Cool.
I'm glad we did this, because
Yeah.
now I feel more energized for part 2 and 3, which is
I-
good for the audience.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. It's good. It's important. We look forward to it. I was worried that your contribution to part 3 was going to be go to practice and play games.
I mean, I
And
definitely will make that recommendation, but I will have other things to bring to the table as well,
yeah, good.
as I already have written down in preparation for that part. But I genuinely do have that. Well, I have in large, bold font with a bunch of stars and question marks all around it. Does it even matter? Which then I was going to go, like, that was going to be my point of just go play your sport, good to go.
Yeah.
So I will bring that up, and I also have other points to bring up as well.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, I have some contributions to that conversation too.
I won't leave them that high and dry. Or what should you do? Just go play your sport. All this stuff we just talked about doesn't matter. Just go play your sport, and it'll take care of itself.
The most conclusive part 3 ever.
Yeah. Go play your sport. The end.
That was good though. That was a fun one.
I did it fun.
I'm glad. And I mean, that's what it's all about here.
That's right.
We're trying to have fun. We did want to end off the 50th episode. Maybe everyone's clamoring for our music suggestions, but we've given them 49 at this point, so you can wait a week for another one. We wanted to take some time to just say thank you to the people that have tuned in. I guess we're thanking the people who listen to this episode specifically, but if you've listened to a few or all of them, we appreciate it. We really enjoy doing the show. We learn a lot ourselves and just enjoy hanging out and talking about this stuff ourselves. So, but it's really, really nice and meaningful. And I don't know, it makes me happy, I guess, that like I enjoy doing this, but it also provides value to other people's lives as well. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, I mean, I echo the same thing. Like it's wild to think that we're already kind of at 50 episodes, and every time somebody reaches out or asks a question about something, or like, hey, I've been listening to some of the episodes, the content is great, keep it up. Like those are all like really, really nice things to hear. And like we said, probably on episode 0, that was so long ago, I don't remember what was said, but like the intention was never to do this to try to like make it big. This is certainly not our day job by any means.
Yeah. It would be cool. I mean, if somebody who's listening wants to sponsor us, then for sure hit us up. But
yeah, it would be awesome. But that wasn't the point. It was, hey, we come out here, we get to learn something. And I think even too it was important. Like this all started in the pandemic, and it wasn't a pandemic fad where like when we were in lockdown and we had nothing to do, we were hopping on the call. Like I think it was a genuine way for us to be able to reconnect on a more consistent basis. We went from being in the same building every single day, multiple hours a day, and we got to spend a lot of time together in and out of the weight room. And so, I mean, I not only thank the audience and thank everybody for listening and all the support, but I have to thank you, Braden, too, because I think this has been a fun journey, and I'm enjoying all of this. And it feels again like for the first time we're working together on something again, which we had a 3 or 4 year gap where we were obviously still friends. I saw you every Christmas and New Year's, and we came back and whatever. But like I said, we went from working in the same environment day in and day out, and 3 or 4 years pass, we're kind of doing our own thing. And it's fun to be back doing something where it feels like we are like working together as a team again. So I thank the audience and I thank you, and I'm looking forward to way more episodes coming out in the future here. So it's been a fun ride, and I hope it stays a fun ride.
Yeah. Damn. That was way better than what I said.
That wasn't my intention. I wasn't trying to outdo you. I was just being genuine. Like,
no, I know. And I appreciate that. And I would say the same thing too. Cause I mean, it was your idea to start the podcast. And so, yeah, thanks for that suggestion and reaching out to me and stuff. And like, honestly, it was definitely something that threw me off guard and was a little bit uncomfortable, I guess, at the start to like put yourself out there and like
Yeah.
put all your thoughts on the internet, and people can
Open
rip you
for
apart if they
anybody
want.
we know the internet's a wild place.
So, but it's been a lot of fun. It's been amazing just to reconnect with you on a much more consistent basis, and it's only gotten more fun, honestly. Like it was a lot of fun at the start for sure, but I think as we've gotten in a groove and it it's only gotten more enjoyable. And I do hope one day that we can work together in person in the same building relatively day in and day out at some point.
Well, hey, you know what? We've made progress because we were a 3 or 4 hour plane ride
Hmm,
in terms of separation. Now we're only a 3 or 4 hour car ride.
there you
So
go.
we're
There
moving,
you
we are
go.
trending in the right direction for maybe something in the future to,
Yeah.
shape up. So yeah, like I'd be
Maybe
stoked about that.
maybe the next move, we're talking about the aerobic system. Maybe the next move will be a 3 or 4 hour jog. We'll be there. We're not
Done. I
gonna
got there.
we're not gonna ever do that.
No,
I'm never going for a 4 hour jog. But
I will not do that either.
anyway, yeah. So thanks everybody. Good stuff. Um, as always, if you have questions, concerns, comments, hit us up on Instagram, Speed Strength Show, Speed Strength Performance, or I'm going to add directed strength to it as well because I'm going to try super hard to start posting more consistently on there, which is my business page. I haven't posted on there in not well over a year and a bit, probably.
Oh, has it been that long?
It's been a really long time.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the last time I posted was when meets were running. So,
Oh, true. But now meets are back up and running. Things are rolling. Yeah.
So going to try to post on that more. And my powerlifting athletes and athletes ideally too. If anybody wants coaching for athlete stuff, then let me know. But yeah, if you want us to talk about anything or questions, concerns, comments, let us know on those accounts. And until then, that was the Speed Strength Show. Thanks for coming along, world.
We will see you next time.
Peace.